You're listening to Expertly Said, a podcast on the art and impact of communication. I'm Kristen Sweeney, founder and CEO of Every Little Word. My guest today is Babs Crane. Babs is a consumer psychologist and design consultant who specializes in bringing human understanding to communications, design, and technology. She works at the fascinating intersection of mind and message, helping businesses understand not just what people do, but why they do it. Drawing on consumer psychology, cognitive and neuroscience research, Babs has worked with enterprise organizations, nonprofits, and small and medium enterprises across a wide range of sectors. She's particularly passionate about projects involving sustainability, equality, and financial well-being that help people live healthier, happier lives. Babs is based just outside of London, and she's also an accomplished dancer and artist, practices that help inform how she thinks about human perception, movement, and creative communication. Babs, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much. It's lovely to be here.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I know we had to rein it in a little bit in our pre-call and also in our call when we first met. So I have been privileged to hear a little bit of this, but you've got a pretty interesting kind of origin story to how you got to this really unique work that you do today. Can you share with us a little bit of that kind of journey into the communications umbrella more broadly?
Yeah. I mean, it's quite relatively unconventional, though. That I think that makes it sound probably more exciting than it actually is. But I was definitely one of these people when it got to making career decisions at the tender age of 18. I, unsurprisingly, like so many others, didn't have a clue what I wanted to do. So I just kind of went into the world of work for a little bit, and I ended up doing sales roles and some broad marketing, not necessarily specialising heavily in that. But at the time I was doing business development. I ended up working at quite a large company here in the UK, like a global business, and they invested quite heavily in staff development. And one of the things that they were really, really keen on was personality profiling, and so much of our training was based around, or had that almost like as the foundation of everything. So how to understand ourselves, our team members, clients, whoever it might be, how you approach different things in business, negotiations, presentations, all sorts of things like that. And it was everything kind of came down to like a personality profile. And I was absolutely fascinated by it. I remember I did this personality test as part of an interview process, and then I was handed this report afterwards, and I felt like somebody was staring into my soul, and I was like, how could this be so accurate? This is terrifying. But instantly, and again, this obviously would say something about me, I'm sure, but I was like, what's the science behind this? I really want to learn more about it, because it just felt like it was almost like a ticket to understanding so much more about just life, right? Like everyone walking this planet, like what is it that makes us tick? And as I was working in that role, I was starting to notice that just the way that I was talking to customers, if I would get different results depending on what I'd said or how I'd said a certain thing.
Mm-hmm.
So there was I was realizing there was quite a lot of things that, influence, lots of nuances that influence human behavior. So I thought, I'm picking up books off of a bookshelf in, the bookshops of the UK. How do I know what I'm actually picking up is legit? Like, how do I, obviously it's been published, so, we know it's not just anything that's been written in this book. However, how do I know what I'm reading about when it comes to understanding humans? Or it was personality stuff that obviously got me into this to begin with, but things kind of developed from there. And I thought, you know what, I was in my 20s at the time, and I thought, this is it. I think this is the thing that I've been waiting for. I always had faith that I'd find something that would hook me in, and I was like, this is the thing. So I went off and started studying, did a degree in psychology, and then after the sales role, I moved more into the marketing world, and I ended up as a designer. So I retrained as a graphic designer initially, So I was in the creative world. And when I was doing my psychology degree in my spare time as a hobby, I framed it as a hobby. It's the only thing that got me through it because it was part-time. So it took about nearly 6 years to get
Okay.
through. So lot of weekends and
Yeah.
and evenings and everything studying. But yeah, I as I was doing that, I realized that actually when I'm designing, or when I was designing, say, like adverts for magazines or web banners or whatever it might have been, there's an awful lot of cognitive psychology involved in that, like in those forms of communication, like what makes us pay attention to one thing over another. Is something memorable? What makes us remember things, some things better than other things? So I realized quite early on, actually, that I could immediately start applying this psychology that I was learning about all those years ago. So when I got to the end of my degree, I thought, okay, here's a very obvious path for me, which admittedly in the UK, it isn't so much of a big thing. I think in the States, there's definitely much that what at the time there's much more of a presence for it, and that's consumer psychology. So I did a master's degree in consumer psychology. There's only a few universities in the UK that offer it, so it's a relatively niche area. But it's that I really wanted to have like a specialism where you can apply all of these different theories and all this knowledge of what drives human behavior in the real world. And I'm using inverted quote fingers for those
Sure.
who can't see me, because everything is the real world, right? But I
Yeah.
think within when people say psychology, there's understandably a huge clinical application for psychology as a real, I think a lot of people know of psychology with like a therapeutic
Therapy. Yeah.
/
Yeah.
clinical
Sure.
application of it. So when I first told a few friends, oh, I'm going to do a master's degree in consumer psychology, I always remember one of them said, well, what does that mean? Do you give people therapy if they spend too much money? Like,
Therapy for companies or
yeah. Yeah. What is this thing? But I always thought, and like you touched on it when you introduced me, and it's definitely like a real passion area for me, because we have such a broad therapeutic application of psychology. So you have, especially in the UK, we have like different chartered areas of psychology. So you could be a clinical psychologist, you could be a counselling psychologist, you could be an educational psychologist, a health psychologist. So you've got all these different chartered areas of psychology. A lot of these areas are doing amazing work, and they're really helping people, especially taking clinical psychology into account. They're helping people when there's, when maybe things have gone wrong, or there's something that's really difficult for whatever reason. And I always thought that how can we use psychology as a force for good to arguably, and this isn't the case for absolutely everything, but maybe we could be using it at much more of a grassroots level to maybe stop people from needing a therapeutic intervention. So how can we use this to help people, as you said at the top of our conversation now, like how can we help people lead happier lives? It sounds very simplistic, but like how
yeah.
can we use that? Like surely we can use this understanding of human behavior to create some kind of positive change that is mutually beneficial, like to organizations and individuals alike. So fast forward many years and here I
Yeah.
am now.
Yeah. Well, what I love about that journey is, especially you going and having that working world experience, is, I think there's, even when you think about like college majors, right? And how much broader that spectrum is from what you can maybe kind of imagine when you are graduating high school
Yeah.
and thinking about college or university. And I think about, my daughter is in first grade and the jobs are like doctor,
Yeah.
veterinarian. They don't even have lawyer yet. Singer, dancer,
Brilliant.
you know, police officer, firefighter, the end. Right. So like, And in some ways, I think at 18, we're still a version of that. And
Yeah.
so many of us end up in professional roles that we could not have conceived of when we first, took that transitional step where it's education, but it's also career preparation. So I love
Yeah.
that you really kind of followed your own curiosity and figuring out what was a fit and gave yourself that time as well,
Yeah.
to let that evolve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm pleased I did. And I think that it's interesting. And I think even some research came out, I think it was 2 weeks ago, talking about the different brain development stages. I don't know if you saw this. I think it might have been published by, it could have been Cambridge University, I'm not sure. Um, but certainly, like up until a couple of weeks ago, and this now it's changed a bit, like slightly, but they say that we kind of, our brains develop in some like key stages, and we all, in the UK, the US, and many other countries, like the age of 18 is when you become legally an adult, and that's when you're making these massive life decisions. But actually, like your prefrontal cortex, like the part of your brain that's kind of involved in this like executive function and being able to make these bigger decisions, ultimately in simplistic terms, doesn't really get fully wired up until you're really, I mean, like I say, up until a couple of weeks ago, it was kind of like up until the age of 25. That's when that,
Yeah.
yeah, that part of your brain kind of really gets going.
That's what I've heard. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
but then since then, like this other research that's come out has said that our brain ages in like 4/5 key stages, and the first stage of development kind of goes up to the age of around 32, is what they've found
Wow.
now in this research they've done. And then
Wow.
we have like our longest period between that age, and I think it was 60, and then there's another. I know, so from 10 to 32, I think it was. Sorry, I should have checked this.
It's
But
okay.
you have like that initial, like real
Wow.
infant period, and
Yeah.
then then like your kind of adolescent stage goes up from, I think it was like from 10, but certainly ended at around the age of 32
Hmm.
in most people that they've studied and in all of these brain scans that they've done. And then we have like a relatively stable period of like mid adulthood that I think takes us up to near
Yeah.
60ish, and then you go on after that point in I
Gosh,
think
think
it's
about
another.
all the decisions you're making
I
that
know.
are determining your trajectory during that time. It's really interesting.
Massive. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's hugely important. So yeah, I mean, I couldn't have done it any other way. Like I genuinely, I know at the age of 18, there wasn't anything that really grabbed
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
And I just thought something will, I know it will. So
Yeah.
I'm not gonna force the
Right.
square peg into the round hole. I'm going to find, find the
Exactly.
square hole. And
Yeah.
and I did, which is good, but
Yeah. And so that
it's
brings us
interesting.
to today, and I'd love to hear more because the clients you're working with are the organizations, right? So tell us in this context, like what kind of problems are you solving for um, small businesses, medium-sized nonprofits, enterprises? What kind of challenges are they kind of up against?
Yeah, it's very, very varied. Um, I predominantly at the minute, actually, and I say this really for the last few years, I've been quite heavily involved within the startup world, um, and or kind of like, yeah, complete startups, businesses that are transforming from like, one business to a
Hmm.
completely different offering. So it's almost a startup, but not quite. I've actually been involved quite a lot with product development. So because I've got my background in design, and that's ultimately what I've been marrying these two worlds together for about 10 years or so now. I think
Yeah.
it is. I've kind of lost count, and I don't like looking back that much because it reminds me of how old I've got. But yeah, so like the graphic design that I mentioned earlier on very rapidly turned into looking at interaction design, user experience design, user interface design, all that kind of stuff. Like
Hmm.
how can we make digital experiences feel better for humans? Because it's amazing that
Yeah.
how many aren't really developed with that understanding of how our brains work, really at the fore. So a lot of my time is spent working with businesses, like solving those kind of challenges. So it
Hmm.
could be complete new product development, saying, right, we've got this idea and this is what our entire business is going to be. we really want this to be optimized from the outset. We want to build this with an understanding of how people are going to get the most from it, because ultimately that, delivers value to the client base, and the
Yeah.
client base, if they're then getting something from it and it improves their experience, their lives, then that's the mutually beneficial outcome that I'm always kind of really looking for in the projects I work on. But I've worked quite heavily in the financial services space.
Mm-hmm.
So in the UK, a couple of years ago, like a massive piece of regulation came in for all of the financial services businesses over here. So anybody that's regulated by like the Financial Conduct Authority, which is the governing body in the UK for finance, they all have to. I mean, they have to adhere to, obviously, a lot of regulation,
Yeah,
and this
sure.
big piece came in.
Yep.
That was all about understanding the consumer. It's called the consumer duty, and there's kind of like 4 pillars to it. And one of the pillars is about customer understanding. So one, obviously, does the business understand their customers well, but
Mm-hmm.
ultimately it's, does the customer understand what you're telling them? Do they understand these
Yeah.
financial products or services that they're potentially buying, engaging with, whatever? Because, we've had some massive mis-selling scandals over the years, especially after the 2008, 2009 financial
Yeah.
crash. There was like a big, some like different types of insurance had been taken out that people didn't really understand what they were
Mm-hmm.
buying. And, so there's been a massive amount of effort to try and prevent that from happening again. So that's primarily, I mean, I've been doing lots of
Yeah.
different things, but that's kind of like the core thing that is
Yeah.
there and continues to be there, because it is so important that people make good decisions for themselves.
It's
So
really interesting too to see the mentality, and I'm probably not equipped to like comment on that as compared to the US in general, but of the companies taking that responsibility for understanding versus that kind of, oh, it's
yeah,
just on the individual to figure out, the information's available, having a
yeah,
greater level of accountability, um, is really fascinating. I'm curious when we talk about knowing your audience. So, in marketing generally, there's obviously a ton of conversation about understanding your audience. And a lot of this is in context of understanding their demographics, understanding their likes and their dislikes and their preferences and their pressures in their job role, and um, a lot of different factors. That information is gathered through, I would say, a range of methods that probably many aren't that scientific. And like kind of hot take I have about marketing in general is that for as much as there's an emphasis on data, um, I am deeply skeptical of the sort of integrity of a lot of that data, and how, or any kind of like in other areas that deal with data a lot, whether it would really like hold up. So
mm,
that's a long-winded run-up to asking, when you think about how will this be perceived, how much is this based on these are human behaviors that we understand from neuroscience and cognitive psychology that apply to everyone, versus these are specific behaviors for people who like the color blue and are between 30 and 50 years old and work in human resources or something like that?
yeah, yeah. It's really interesting. Um, so I will start this by saying what we are told when we are tiny is definitely true. We are all unique. Like, no, there's not another one of us ever anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
So but there are definitely really common patterns of
Hmm.
behaviour, and that is ultimately where I work. In a lot of that space, and that is like, ultimately that's like the application of behavioural science, consumer psychology, is looking at that kind of stuff, well, knowing that and being able to identify it. So there's some real core fundamental drivers of behaviour, that we all show, but just some people will show them to a greater or lesser extent. And I think and some of these things like do really have an impact or an influence on what people end up doing, or how we might think about certain things. So one of the core, almost like founding theories of behavioral science, is surrounding this concept of loss aversion, the fact that we go out of our way, we put a lot more effort in avoiding a loss versus getting an equivalent gain. And the pain of losing something like an asset or whatever it might be feels a lot like that, feels much more emotionally resonant to us than like the positive emotion, the joy or whatever of getting the equivalent. When I first came across this whole theory, I always thought about back when I was in my previous mentioned sales role. Every year we would take clients to one of like the horse racing tracks or courses in the UK. This is years ago, but one of like the big prestigious ones, and it was all very nice and everyone dressed up and there were top hats and fascinators and all sorts there. It was very, I know, very stereotypically summer in England. But I always remember, I was gambling. I don't do it. I never have done. But I did take, I think it was like £20 to put on a horse.
Yeah.
and I put £20 on a horse, and I was like, right, it lost. And I didn't feel particularly great about that. So then I put maybe like another £10 on, whatever it was. Ultimately, I think I literally had about £40 to deal with. But basically I lost the £20, and then eventually, over the course of the afternoon, I managed to make back the £20. And I didn't really feel I felt like I'd lost something, even though I came away even. Like, to me, it kind of didn't really feel like, I didn't really feel like good about the fact I was coming away like even. And actually it would take probably a win of maybe another at least £10 to £15 on top of winning back the 20 to actually then kind of reset that emotional balance, if that makes sense. And it's quite a common, that's a very common occurrence. But we see that kind of disproportionate effect across so many different things. So when you think about like so many marketing messages, or just messages in general, but marketing messages especially, we're always talking about like, this is what you're going to get if you use this product, you get this. If you sign up for our service, you get that, you get whatever. So everything's kind of framed with that gain framing to it. You're gaining, because we kind of, this is one of these theories where people think as humans, we just want to get as much stuff as possible. Like, we want to have as much resource, however you want to define it, but that's kind of what it is. But psychology, especially like from like the 1970s, there was a real like 2-3 decades of like research in this area. And a lot of these studies found that actually people they'll feel the pain of maybe losing something or missing out on something more than the like gaining something of like an equivalent value. So that's a really common thing, that we show that pattern of behavior. And that particular theory is one that it won the Nobel Prize as a researcher. I don't know if you're aware of him, called Daniel Kahneman, who was a really prominent. I mean, people often refer to him as like the godfather of behavioral science. I first discovered him in my psychology degree, but it was all about, judgments and decision making, and how do you make decisions under uncertainty. And it's the fact that we kind of, because our brains are, people have often said lazy, and if anyone's ever encountered behavioral science literature, which a lot of people have because it's popular, and I'm all for it. I'm obviously a massive fan. But people have kind of described the way our brains work as being irrational, lazy, like kind of terminology like that, which I I take a little bit of umbrage to that. I like to frame it as we are really efficient. This ultimately what it is. If you think about
Conserve
all
those calories. Yeah.
exactly, exactly what it is. It is literally comes down to calories.
Yeah.
Our brains just take up so much resource. For the size of it, like it
Hmm.
takes up like about a quarter of our calorific, resource every single day. So, like you think about if our brains had to really consciously, effortly process every single decision that we make, we just wouldn't get out the front door of
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
morning. So we've evolved to develop these quick patterns and ways of thinking.
Hmm.
But it does then mean that there are good for us in the fact that we can actually identify these patterns of behavior. There are really common patterns of behavior, and these are seen across all the generations. So again, like when you talk about segmentations and
Yeah,
looking at like
exactly.
generational definitions and that kind of thing.
Right.
Millennials don't like this, and Gen Xers are like that, and boomers are just, they think in this way.
Hmm.
Yes, we have influences from where we grew up and where we live and the people we interact with, but the way our brains work, there isn't so much of a difference across generations, like because these are quite common patterns of behavior
Right.
that humans have. But like I say, some people might demonstrate loss aversion, as using that
Hmm.
example. So like some people will be really, really loss averse, and that will then make them really risk averse because they won't want
Right.
to take that risk. Other people are more comfortable taking a risk. They will still show some kind of loss aversion, but it probably wouldn't be to the same extent as others. But it's a common thing. So
What's so interesting to me about this is that, and I've heard this in other areas, like that effectively, like we're not very good self analysts, right? Like you said, we can identify through studies these patterns, but it's the opposite of
yeah,
what people kind of
yeah,
intuitively go to. And I think about when you were talking about graphic design as well,
yeah,
like, why is it that you can't show a design necessarily to like a random stakeholder, like a CEO or something, and they intuitively know what works best because that's how they're also wired to respond, but that's not the case, and similarly with written content, like there are, it would seem like, well, it should be, we should all intuitively sort of know this because we're influenced in the same way, and yet it seems we're not great like reporters or
yeah.
identifiers of our own behavior. um I just find that fascinating. Like,
It is, and I must admit, there's some things on it within like the world of behavioural science and consumer psychology and other areas where it actually does that. When you read some of the research, you go, oh yeah, no, that adds up. Like totally, I experienced that, and it doesn't come as much of a surprise.
yeah.
But then there are plenty of other areas where you just think, well, of course, people will do X because of Y. Like, because, of
Hmm.
course, we're going to see that people will do this thing because why wouldn't they? Like,
Yeah.
because everything adds up. And so, of course, and then when they don't do that, then you go, okay, why is that happening? And that's ultimately where psychology comes in, because it's understanding the things that kind of throw these theories on their head basically. So I think that's
Yeah.
the thing that I've always found very fascinating about it. And when you first start, I mean, again, rewinding back to when I first started studying this stuff, like because I did some of my studying as a distance learner, so I was basically having to one experiment on myself, and then when I first started running my own experiments on like my other half, friends that were coming
Yeah.
around for
Yeah.
dinner, I'd be like, right, do this test for me. And I thought, it's no, I was like, yeah, okay, I can see in the textbook that other people, it will take them longer to do this over that because of this reason, but I won't, because I know that. And also, like, my other half won't. So I think I've, got a good measure of him. And I think he's probably pretty quick at this. Everyone showed the same, everybody showed the same
Yeah.
result,
Patterns.
no matter
Yeah.
what. And you think, oh my goodness, like, you just, yeah. So that's the thing that I found most exciting about it. And I still do when things just, you know, these
Yeah.
common patterns just appear all the time.
Do you have a kind of I guess like pet peeve, like misconception, whether it's consumer or kind of even expanding into like pop psychology. I know we've talked a little bit about personality profiles. Is there something
Yeah.
that you hear people say that just like you're just like, God, it really grinds your gears that a lot of people are getting it wrong?
Yeah, I mean, well, yes, there's a lot. So what this, not sure we have enough time. But what I will say is so it's been fantastic. This Nobel Prize was won by Daniel Kahneman back in, I think, 2002, I think it was. And that then kind of kicked off this, suddenly it propelled these theories about human behavior, like out into the more popular world. He wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, which
Mm-hmm.
basically documented his life's work, and tried to explain it in a easy to digest format. People would argue that a lot of people haven't managed to fully digest that book, but I think that this thing, like there's so many things that people have kind of grabbed hold of, and it, this is a human tendency. So we really do like to simplify stuff down. So I think my pet peeve is when the nuance, because human behavior is very nuanced, and this, being somebody who works in the commercial world, applying this things, there's quite a reductionist approach
Yeah.
across everything, because there kind of has to be, right? We
Mm-hmm.
can't go into the absolute ins and outs of every theory, but yes, things do get simplified down to the point where they become ineffective. So when people will grasp like a theory and then go, oh, I know that, and then kind of water it down and water it down, and then unsurprisingly you won't see kind of an effect if you
Doesn't hold
try
up
and
anymore.
apply this particular thing to
Yeah.
a communication. um the other thing as well, like just very, very briefly, and I know we've discussed this before, but it is very the personality psychology world, there are certain models, there are certain frameworks um, that have just stood the test of time in regards to the fact that just they they won't be used nowadays really by psychologists, but you will see them being used in multiple HR departments across massive global
Mm-hmm.
businesses. And it's, again, I think they've endured because of that same fact of it being quite reductionist. And it's like, if you can kind of give somebody a personality type and say, right, you're this,
Yeah.
you're like this. And some of these theories have got like this, their personality types rather than traits. Um, but those ones haven't really, like the personality types haven't really, a lot of them haven't really stood the test of time when it comes to the science behind them, like the empirical science behind them. But
Yeah.
they endure nonetheless.
Yeah. So we won't ask you to bash, but are there one or two top profiles that you recommend people look to as having the most scientific backing?
Well, the one, I mean, there are plenty, and this is kind of hopping over into the occupational psychology world, of which I'm not a chartered member, but
Yeah.
so just a caveat there to say that. But the main, the kind of like the gold standard personality profiling, that is kind of used across all of psychology, it's almost like the foundational model, is the one that's called the Big Five, the
Mhm.
ocean model. So that basically, and the idea of that is that everybody sits on some point on a continuum of five different personality traits. Of the O is an acronym, OCEAN. So the O
Mhm.
stands for your openness to new experience. The C stands for your level of conscientiousness. E is extroversion. A is agreeableness, and the N is neuroticism, your propensity to worry. It's always the one
Yeah.
that everyone goes,
Yeah,
no
yeah,
one,
yeah. I
you're not
saw, have
defining
they
somebody
maybe
as neurotic,
adjusted?
but
Yeah. I saw that they've maybe adjusted. I forget what they've replaced it with, but I think there might be some cases where they're using a different term now.
yeah, I know, because everyone's like, "Ugh," when you say
Yeah, yeah.
neuroticism. So
Yeah.
it's just your propensity to worry, and
Mhm.
the whole idea is that we score somewhere low, medium, high, each of us across those
Mhm.
five dimensions. And actually, this context that we're in can slightly adjust that. I mean, the whole idea of high personality, is that it is relatively enduring, but it can nudge up and down a little bit on those
Yeah.
scales. And that's why this continuum is, I think, much more widely accepted approach, and the fact that it's been like rigorously tested for years and people have kind of gone, yeah, I think we're happy that this
Yeah.
holds. This is pretty watertight. But
Yeah.
some of the personality typing kind of like almost puts people in one particular defined box. But the Big Five model and others kind of, they accept the fact and they acknowledge the fact that we can change a bit depending on,
Yeah.
the context that we're in. And
Sure. Sure.
so, yeah.
Great. So I think I could do this seriously all day. But I want to make sure we have time to dig into our one big idea. So
Mm.
um this every episode we cover one big idea that lets us kind of get into the nitty-gritty details of like a particular aspect. Um and you actually surprised me when you came up with when we got together to talk about this, and you talked about the one big idea is building trust. So where I immediately went with this is how interesting, because, and maybe this is my own personal cynicism, like I tend to associate maybe the idea of using psychology to influence
Mhm.
people as it's kind of manipulative, right? Like, or it has
Yeah.
certainly has the potential for it. And yet you talk about a like a three-pronged approach to crafting message, designing how it's delivered using these principles, and then improving how businesses are psychologically perceived. And to
Mhm.
hear you bring that around to trust was really fascinating. So I'm wondering if you can just elaborate a little bit on why trust, even to start, is the end goal. Like, I don't disagree with you, but
Yeah.
love to hear it from your perspective.
I know it's a big one, isn't it? When we spoke, I was like, there's so it's like a rich tapestry, trust, right? And there's so many
Yeah.
different strands and threads that make that up. But trust is ultimately a psychological concept, right? Like, I mean, everything's psychology, everything is communication. So, trust is such an important thing. And I think this has become particularly pertinent with the evolution of AI and everyone using Gen AI in some capacity or another. Um, because ultimately, we as humans want to trust things and we want to be trusted. It's like a real core innate thing. Um, and so much of the of trust comes from different factors. So like, when you're doing it like communications, any marketing communication, when we have so many things, adverts saying you can trust us, emails come out, you can trust us
Yeah.
to do this. And companies are saying it all the time. But you need to earn that trust. And one thing that is happening so much, and so I've mentioned about working in the financial services world, like working with clients in that world over here, it's something that I find a lot. So, and when you're working with heavily regulated businesses, people who are trying to deliver huge swathes of information
Yeah.
about really complex topics,
Hmm.
where you need people to make good decisions based on this communications piece. They need to be able to trust it, and they want to be able to trust it. And it actually feels really jarring as a human when you don't know if you can trust it. Um, and I think that it's trust is what I've boiled it down to. But one of, like I've kind of said, one of the core things is effort, and showing the effort that's gone into creating that piece, delivering that piece, whatever it might
Yeah.
be. It's a really interesting. So I'm saying this from the angle of a lot of people, slash, let's just kind of assume that pretty much everybody is using generative AI in some capacity at the minute.
Hmm.
And especially in these highly regulated industries, they are, delivering huge amounts of documentation and it's really polished, right? They can go, brilliant. As a human, I can just offload that somewhere else now, and that's a
Hmm.
fantastic thing. Because we're efficient. our brains are efficient. We're
Yeah.
always looking
Yeah.
for something that makes
Sure.
something a bit more efficient. So, that's not a surprise that that's happening. But some studies have come out quite recently, I think in the last few months, where it's looking at like how people, their perception of what things are worth, value, that kind of stuff. And even you've mentioned, like I do some art in my spare time, and one of these studies, it was looking at people's perception of artwork, and participants were shown different images, different pieces of art, and they were asked, rate them. Do you like them? So they gave them all a rating, and then they were told, oh, by the way, this is AI generated art. Like, this is something that AI has created. And then they were told to rate them again. And the ratings of like how much like they liked them, how much they perceived they were worth, how much they
Mhm.
valued them, that kind of stuff just significantly dropped the minute they were told that it was generated
Yeah.
by AI. And there's so much of that. And then when they were shown human generated pieces, it was the opposite effect. And I think it's just having that effort, um, and that, being able to see that effort that's gone into something, has a massive impact.
It's so interesting because something I always think about is everyone, like most everyone, right, likes the idea of being able to be more efficient by
Yeah.
using AI. Almost everyone dislikes being on the other side of feeling like they received something that
Yep.
was AI generated. And that incongruency is just really interesting to me because it's like we're not applying our personal experiences as consumers, clients, buyers, whatever that may be, audiences, to how we think about production. And it seems so obvious to me. Like,
Yeah.
a question we should be asking all along. Like sometimes, um, even in my own work, like brainstorming with clients or like, what about this? What about this? And it's just like, to your point of it doesn't have to be perfectly segmented. It's just like, would you click on that? Would you take up that offer? Like, forget having all the checkpoints of target market. Just like be a human for a second. Like, would that
Yeah.
hold any appeal to you? Like, let's just use common sense first. So I don't know. I feel that idea that as a undervaluing, or not, maybe not undervaluing, maybe appropriately valuing, or that the effort has always been um, part of what we valued, but we were never able to quantify that. And
Yeah.
so I guess maybe there was an assumption that losing it didn't matter.
Yeah. It's it's interesting because obviously even just you saying like, just use some common sense. Like, would you click on that? Would that engage you? It's common sense, but ultimately I'd argue that common sense is some kind of emotional engagement, right?
Yeah.
So, if it's not emotionally engaging you,
Right.
then are you gonna are you going to engage with that particular thing?
Right.
And this is
Right.
where understanding that and understanding what drives our thinking and our, like our behavior is massively important because we are humans too. And on the point about so like these big pieces of documentation, I'll use this as the ongoing example, like these massive um technical
Hmm.
communication pieces that are going out. They are, you can understand why individuals within businesses are choosing to, will default to that as
Sure.
as an approach, because you've got a lot of information to convey. If you're in a regulated industry, then you feel like you have to make sure you're given the right information. But actually it's about how it is presented and how easy it feels to actually understand that information,
Hmm.
and where does it come from. We engage as humans on, so just to rewind slightly on that, sorry, but there's a whole framework out there, and this is what I use with a lot of my brand perception work, And it came from social psychology. It came from studies in like stereotyping, basically, like these uh, loads of, these things have been studied, and they've kind of been able to map them, that we form judgments about others on two dimensions of their level of competence and their level of warmth. So it started off kind of looking at other social groups, this research, and then some people came along and went, well, hang on a minute, do we do the same thing with businesses as well, like brands? Do
Hmm.
we think of brands in the same way? And it's mapped, like they've basically mapped those two dimensions. So like ultimately it boils down to, the perceptions of competence and the perceptions of warmth. And lots of businesses will really go hard on the competence, especially in technical industries,
Hmm.
where you
Yeah.
are,
Yeah.
in the kind of work that I've been getting involved with. So like if they're going really hard on the competence, but they kind of forget about the warmth side of things. But ultimately, if you engage on the warmth first, then that's where the trust is immediately built, and then the competence just helps to scaffold that up and build it up even
Yeah.
higher. So it's a really, really important thing. And the minute if you're producing lots of stuff with Gen AI, which I work with AI companies, so I'm absolutely like
Hmm.
I'm all
Yeah.
for the merits of AI. Big caveat on that one. Um, but when you find out that it hasn't been produced by that human being and it has been produced by AI, again, some research that's out there, that feels more deceitful to us and more like
Yeah.
negative to us, and if somebody was outwardly aggressive to us, like that feeling of deceit just feels horrible. So like I think, and if you think as a business or a brand, if you're communicating to individuals and your client base, you don't want them feeling like that. That's how like psychology like works. So
Yeah. And
if you can avoid this, then everyone's going to have a better experience. So
yeah, and I suspect that there's certainly a feeling or a hope that it's just going to get so good that we can fool everyone.
yep.
Um, I don't know. It seems from the context that we're talking about, that seems like a shaky premise to build it on, right? Because if it is
Mm.
sort of uncovered or discovered or disclosed, then it doesn't really matter how good it was. The point is the trust, it will be lost. And
Yeah.
it's also possible that perception will change over time. Um,
Yeah.
the other thing I think about is, certainly there are a few areas where, software engineering is one, coding and writing, in a lot of senses another, that have been like very overtaken, and a lot of applications for AI. And I've thought like, will sort of human first writing be kind of the equivalent of like making your own soap or something like really
Yeah.
artisanal, right? That can be
Yeah.
sort of mass produced, but you're going to the local market to buy it, or and I just thinking about, you know, or even like luxury items, right? Where it's like hand stitched leather. There are these ways in which they demonstrate the effort,
Yeah.
in the messaging, maybe in the storytelling that happens behind the scenes. Here are the people who are making your product. Um, I think it's a little trickier for service
Mm.
organizations, honestly, to do that. But it is something I've been thinking about, which is like how, if, and especially in light of this conversation, like how can we sort of share the effort and not just the output, um,
Yeah.
as part of this, is maybe a way to build greater trust and retain or increase value of what we're doing.
I think that's the thing. Like, I think we're in a world of polish at the minute, and I think that actually now one of the biggest credentials we've got is that almost like a slight imperfection.
Yeah.
That's almost like from these studies that have come out, like the imperfections and knowing having some transparency of what goes on behind the scenes is ultimately like a badge of merit,
Yeah.
because AI has leveled that playing field. And we've seen from lots of different studies that the people, across different applications, but people using AI for like perhaps job applications, the weaker candidates are brought right up to a really good level playing field. But
Yeah.
actually, the use of AI with the candidates that might have been stronger actually can almost
Bring it
regress them back
down.
to that
Yeah.
same, so
Yeah.
everyone's kind of like at a new meeting point somewhere. So having these, it's basically being able to communicate, I cared enough to do the work.
Yeah.
That's the thing that it
Yeah.
comes down to, I think. And and as humans are human, and all the like technology is technology, but all technology is built by and used by humans. So we have to make sure that we're optimizing this for humans, because we're the ones that are using it,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah. Until our agents are buying from our
of
agents and selling
course,
to our agents, then,
yeah, yeah,
we could.
and then we can all make soap and sell it on a
That's
market.
right. That's right. All right. I think we will leave our one big idea there. Certainly,
It's a big
just the
one.
tip of the iceberg in terms of
Yeah.
that conversation. But I do want to bring us to the last word. So this is the same 5 questions
Oh,
that every guest gets. And you just go with your gut on these. Are
okay,
you ready, Babs?
I'm ready. I'm ready.
Question 1. What's your favorite word to say out loud?
Mm. Oh, there are many. I'm going to go with something food based. I'm going to go with blancmange.
What is
Have you
that?
ever heard this? I
Never.
wondered if this. Yeah, it's like a
Showstopper here.
I've actually said the most British thing. Actually, it's French, I think. But yeah, it's like a childhood dessert that my grandmother used to make, and it's kind of almost like a mousse slash jelly thing. It's really hard to describe. It's kind of
Okay.
dairy based, but not quite. It sounds. I'm not selling it. I appreciate that, but it's a brilliant word, blancmange.
Amazing. Headed in the opposite direction. Question 2. What's a word you know from reading, but you're not quite sure how to say it out loud?
I think I'm gonna have to reverse engineer this one slightly. So I knew the word segue, as in like to, move into a different topic.
Hmm.
Uh and I was using it for years, and then I saw it written down and had no idea that was how it was spelled. And I was reading this
Ah,
passage of text, and I
yeah.
was like, what on earth is that word? And then when I really
Segui.
read it, yeah, well, that's not how I would have ever have spelt that. So yeah, I'd say
That's
that one.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's one phrase or saying you wish could be retired for good?
Okay, I'm going to bang the AI drum here, but I'm going to say, but here's the thing, or phrases such as those that you often see in the AI generated text. I
Okay,
think
fair
that
enough.
yeah, it's just because of now the overuse of it,
Yeah.
unfortunately, it's lost its impact. And I'm annoyed because I would use that phrase a
Right.
lot
Right.
in writing. And then you're
Yes.
like, I've got to distinguish myself somehow now. So yes, that
Yeah.
one I'd say.
Question 4. What's a communication practice or principle that's non-negotiable for you?
I would say to make your key points at the beginning and at the end of a passage, a sentence, a presentation, whatever it is. And that's just purely down to the way that our brains remember information. If you get your key point up top at the end, you've got a much higher chance of it being remembered.
I had a mentor who used to say, tell them what you're going to tell them, and
Yep,
tell them what you told them.
we told them 100%. There is plenty of science to back that up.
Yeah, yeah. And last question, what's the last thing you read, heard, or watched that's really stuck with you?
So we've just had a series of The Traitors on TV in the UK,
Uh-huh.
the Celebrity
Uh-huh.
Traitors. It was our first celebrity one. The whole country watched it. I've been a massive fan from the beginning because anything there you can see how people behave in groups and,
Oh,
just look at human
sure.
behavior. I love. But that again, it goes back to that whole point of deception, right? And trying to like preempt people's behavior and understand things and how people problem solve, and just the entirety I just really enjoyed.
Wow, that is so on brand. What an on brand answer.
I don't know.
Babs, thank you so much for joining us today. If our listeners want to learn more about you, where can they find you?
So you can find me at mindthehumans.com. And LinkedIn, I'm Babs Crane. I think I might be the only one on there with that my name. But yes, by all means, please connect, send me a message if you're interested. I get quite passionate about this subject area, so I will always happily talk to people about it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on today. This was a fantastic conversation.
Oh, thank you. No, I've really enjoyed it. It's been brilliant.
That's it for this episode of Expertly Said. We're produced by Every Little Word, a boutique content and communications agency. If you liked what you heard, you know what to do. Subscribe, share the episode with a colleague, or leave us a review. If you want to connect with me directly, please do. You can find me on LinkedIn. Just search Kristen Sweeney. Thanks for listening. Talk soon.